Hey there everyone and welcome to episode 3 of the Night Build series. In this episode we're going to be looking at the 3 skills, whirl, protector and enrage. These 3 skills each have their uses and are very great on the class, so let's get stuck in. The first one to talk about is whirl. Now, before going any further with this skill, it's very important to note one very important thing, which is this skill locks you into the animation. So while you're doing this, you can't actually use any other skills. For this reason, you need to be using one of the latest runes. The first few still have this issue where you get locked into the animation, and then they decided, yeah, let's just remove that. So the latest runes, you don't get locked into the animation. So as you can see, I can still use things like Protector and Enrage here while doing the whirl. So with that in mind, you're using one of these latest runes, so you're not getting locked into the animation, so this skill is just going to be a great damage skill for the class. Now, as you can imagine, its area of effect, it does 5 hits over the 4 seconds while it's on, and you need to be next to the enemies in order to hit them. The area that it hits is not that big, but the damage it deals makes it totally worth it, that when you're stood next to, say, a boss, or just, some enemies that you're fighting, you're going to be doing a lot of extra damage with using this skill. It reminds me lots of Mana Storm, which is actually surprisingly on the skills, it's exactly the same skill number. I think it's number 7. So yeah, really makes me think of Mana Storm. Same with the cooldown, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, moving on from that, so this skill's damage skill doesn't really have much else to it. The skill runes, they don't really add any effects on. I think there's a little bit of slow. There's always a little bit of slow on the water skill runes. That's pretty much what they do. Oh, the nature one slows too. But anyway, later skill runes, if they have any cool effects, then they'll come into play. But mostly it's just damage, and it's just you put a skill rune on that doesn't break, that stops the doesn't make you locked into the animation. And is an element which is powerful for dealing with the enemies you're dealing with, all that kind of stuff. So let's go show it using it against some enemies in combat. While doing this, I'm going to talk about how many skill points to put in it. So at 10 skill points, it has a 10-second cooldown, and that's really kind of useful. 10 seconds is a good amount to just be able to use it reasonably frequently, hitting things. It's not a spam skill, but it's going to be doing good damage. So let's use it here. You can see as I run through the enemies, it doesn't last too long. It lasts for 4 seconds. So I can run through the enemies and kill them off like that. If I'm not using it with a screw in here, but I'm not using any other skills, so it doesn't really matter. If you can see there, it hits them once per second for 5 hits in total. So it's putting more points into this. If you get it up to 99, the cooldown only increases by 50% to 15, which makes it a little bit better than some other damage skills. If you push them to 99, they double the cooldown. However, it's not really my personal preference. I prefer to work on elemental stats to boost the damage from the skill rune, which doesn't get increased as you put more points into it. 10 seconds is kind of, a good amount to be using this skill. And making it hit more, but you can use it less frequently, I don't like quite so much. But yeah, so that's more of a personal preference thing. You could get this up to 99. It's kind of maybe one of the better damage skills to get to 99, but I would still keep it at 10. Anyway, that's this skill in a nutshell. There's not really much more to say about it. I'm just going to show it with the skill in it, just so you can see here. Bit of damage and elemental damage. Alright, so the next skill to talk about is Protector. This is probably the original best protecting skill, defense skill, I mean, for knights. It slaps on damage reduction, which damage reduction is very important compared to armor bonus. Reason being is damage reduction will stack with other damage reduction. So this 60%, while that 60% is great, if you get, say, 25% from something else, suddenly you've got 85% damage reduction. Which, if you then stack another 20% on, suddenly you're literally invincible. And well, that's where this skill kind of comes into play. It gets a bit nuts when you stack it with other things that literally make you invincible. So the problem is that it's got a 10-second duration and a 30-second cooldown, so you can't have it on that much. You can't have it on all the time. It would be a bit broken if you could. However, with a cooldown potion, well, the cooldown comes to 13 seconds, and since it lasts 10 seconds, you stack it with other stuff, you can be invincible for 10 seconds, and not invincible, but still very tanky in the other 3 seconds. So this skill's a little bit nuts when you bring into play a cooldown pot. However, otherwise, it's just generally a good tanking skill. I would personally say for using this skill, you don't want to spam it. One I'm going to talk about later, you do spam, I say later, not in this video, in a later video, you do want to spam it. But this one, personally, I do not spam it. I use it when I know I'm about to get hit by a lot of stuff. So let's say I engage with a boss, I start fighting with a boss, the boss hits me a bit and stuff, my health starts going down, I then use it, and I know for the next, section, the next 10 seconds, I'm going to be tanking so much that it's not really, much of an issue. So anyway, that's how I personally choose to use it. It's kind of, I'll sometimes use it preemptively, like when I engage with a boss, at that point, or maybe just before I engage with the boss, I put Protector on, so I know, okay, I'm going to go in there tanking, and then after it ends, I'll run around for a little bit before engaging again, because, I'm a little bit weaker while it's not on, or that kind of thing. It depends how tough the content is for you, but Protector is definitely one of those skills that is really good for helping you survive in battles, and one of the things which makes knights so good at tanking. So I haven't really showed this in the combat because there's nothing really to show, it just reduces the damage you take. The other main thing to note about this skill is quite a big dimension to it, and that is in party play. So if you've been reading the description here, it says you take the damage from other party members too. Now this means if any allies get hit while you have the Protector skill on, if they're far away, it doesn't happen, but if they're fairly nearby, now let's say, I'm stood here. If an ally is stood about here, it will work. If they're stood right at the corner of the screen or off the screen, it's not going to work. They've got to be within a certain radius for it to actually work on it. But then what happens is they don't take any damage. Any hits they take go to you instead, and it goes through your damage reduction and stuff that's happening at the time. So that's where Protector can become kind of nuts in some parties, but also you have to be very careful about it. Because if you use this and then your allies just go charging in and all get hit and they're like, oh, that's great because I'm not taking any damage, suddenly you can get killed off. And that's not good if you've only got one life in a particular bit of content. However, if you're able to stack Protector with other defense buffs to make yourself invincible, well, then you're in business because it makes your entire party invincible. So yeah, this skill is pretty cool. There's quite a bit you can do with it. And in terms of skirrings, there's a few different interesting effects that are going on it. Personally, I like this one, just to talk about it briefly. It's when you do basic attacks, there's a chance that you will heal yourself and do some area damage of water. So it slaps on a bit of damage to your basic attacks, and if you're doing the basic attacks, now personally when I play Knight, I don't use basic attacks that much, but if I were to do any, then there's a chance that it will also deal some extra damage and heal me. So it's just a nice little buff. Most of them are just nice little buffs because the Protector skill itself is already so powerful. The last thing to talk about is putting more skill points in this. So it works well with 10 skill points in it. However, this is one of the skills that actually just gets a straight up buff if you put more skill points in it. So it is one that I recommend getting to 99. However, I'd say it's less important compared to other skills. Other skills get more if you push them to 99, but this one, all it does is increases the mana cost and increases the damage reduction. The damage reduction goes up to 75%, which makes it even easier to get invincible. Since there are various dragon buffs and stuff which can give you 25% damage reduction, there are not tons, but there are ones out there which, when stacked with this, make you invincible a bit more easily, and obviously it's going to work, it's just going to function better by having 75% damage reduction rather than 60. If you think about it, the amount you're taking is 40%, and that's being reduced to 25%. So you're taking slightly over half what you used to be taking from this being at 10 points. So yeah, it's definitely a massive buff, and I'd recommend it, but it's slightly less good compared to other Knight skills going up to 99. So the final skill to talk about today is enrage. Now enrage is a bit of a complicated one. I was thinking before this video, I was like, I don't want to go into too many details on it, but it's a bit of a weird one. I'm not going to talk about below 10 skill points because it's not going to be really a case that much. So 10 skill points, what this does is it gives you auto crit, just auto crit for 7 seconds. Considering the cooldown of 45 seconds, it doesn't have much use. You're not really going to want to be using this for doing extra damage, because you'd be better off having a different skill in there, like an extra damage skill or something. Where this does come into play is guild raids, where your crit rate is, I believe, set to 50%. And so changing that 50% into 100% for 7 seconds, and you're most likely going to have a cooldown potion active. Well, you should be if you're trying to optimize for guild raid damage. So the cooldown isn't, quite so much of a problem. Then you're going to be doing quite a bit of extra damage by having enrage on there. But other than that little case, you're not really going to be using this. Where you really want to use this is either with a scurrying in it that buffs your damage, or by pushing this to 99. So I'm going to start off by talking about the scurrying. There are a couple of scurryings, older scurryings, which I am not so much a fan of. Well, I say older, Freezing Rage is actually the most recent, but Demon's Rage is the one I really want to talk about here. What Demon's Rage does is that when you get hit, sometimes there's a 25% chance that it will buff your damage and armor by 25%. Now this armor buff is not so much of a big deal. If you're using, if you watch the previous video where we talked about spikes and you can get a 300% armor buff, you're sort of on 505% armor the whole time. So increasing this, it stacks up to 4 times. So increasing armor by an extra 100% isn't actually that much, because it's more like increasing your armor by 20% proportionately. So the armor buff is less important. What is important here is that your damage gets increased by 25%. And that can stack to 4 times. So your damage will get increased by 100%. Now you can kind of see where I'm going with this. With the auto crit, with the damage buff, suddenly this skill is going to increase your damage by a lot. Now the thing is, you need to be getting hit while you use it, which makes it a little bit more complicated. You kind of use it while you're engaged in combat when there's lots of enemies hitting you, because just a boss hitting you isn't going to trigger it enough. In PvP it will trigger enough if you're fighting someone. But yeah, this is like actually one of Knight's crazy damage dealers. However, like I said, it's quite difficult to use, and not necessarily something you want to use when you only have 10 points in it. This is one of the skills which I would recommend getting up to 99 as one of the first things you do. I'd say probably spikes first and then enrage. Now the reason is it reduces the cooldown as well as increasing the damage bonus. So this damage bonus does not stack with the Demon's Rage. You can only get 100% out of this skill. But what will happen is you'll get the 100% as soon as you use this skill, and then over the duration of it, over those 7 seconds, you're getting hit, it's triggering the Demon's Rage. So then when the 7 seconds end, you still have the 100% bonus from Demon's Rage, and in fact each one's triggered, each of those 4 triggers have happened separately, so then ultimately you get roughly 100% damage bonus for 12 seconds, and for the first 7 seconds you have auto crit. Now if you could follow that, great. If you didn't, don't worry so much. Basically this just buffs your damage like crazy for a limited time if you have 99 points in it, and if you have the Demon's Rage skill, scurrying in it, then it will sort of keep that going for a bit longer. So using this skill, it has uses in PvE for sure. You want to use this to take down bosses quickly, or otherwise just help get some damage in. Having the auto crit is excellent for certain maps, like if you don't quite have the stats for it, if you say you're doing the master maps and they, it's really hard to crit in the master maps, so having this just increases your damage output dramatically. But also where it's brilliant is in PvP for kind of turning the tide. So what I would personally do with this skill in PvP is engage in combat with someone else. Start the fighting, start a bit of hitting and everything, and then flip on enrage, and then spam your damage skills. And suddenly you will just do an enormous amount of damage all in one go, because not only you're automatically critting, but also your damage output is almost doubled. You've got the buff from your passive and blah blah blah, so it's almost doubled. You're doing way more damage, yeah, it just works really nicely. This just basically turns the class into hyper mode and gives it the damage output that you want. So yeah, I didn't really mention the cooldown. The cooldown comes down from 45 seconds to 30 seconds, but getting it to 99 points. That's also one of the really big things about putting 99 points in this, is 30 seconds is far more usable than it was at 45. Because now you don't feel so bad about having this on your hotbar, because you can use it quite frequently. And if I had remembered to put a cooldown potion on, then you would have seen it comes off in 13 seconds, something like that. Yeah, with 13 seconds we saw from Protector. So the fact that it lasts 7 seconds with the auto crit, and like I was saying with Demon's Rage, that often makes it extend by to roughly 12 seconds or maybe a bit more of damage buff. The fact that it comes off cooldown in 13 seconds, well, you can have damage buff on practically constantly. if you have a cooldown potion on. So this is where you can really get some brilliant damage output on Knight. So I went into quite a lot of detail on these skills, and we didn't really see much combat because there isn't much to show with these skills apart from whirl. But I hope it's given you quite a good insight into how these skills work. Whirl is just basically a good damage dealer on the class. You should have it with a screwing that doesn't break the animation, so it doesn't lock you into the animation, and then you're good to go. 10 points in it is where I'd recommend, but it's personal preference. You can go up to 99 if you want to be doing more damage but have a slightly lower cooldown, slightly longer cooldown. Protector is your brilliant damage defense buff. Messing up my words now. It's a good defense buff, and you can kind of break the game by stacking it with other damage reduction buffs. I didn't go into massive details on that, but there's dragon buffs, there's set effects, there's screw-ins from other skills which I'll go through when I get to that, and otherwise, yeah, that's pretty much it. Potions as well, I guess they're a thing. And otherwise, it's great for parties where you can like pull the damage to you, make your party invincible, well, practically invincible, while you tank a ton of damage. Makes Knights really, really awesome to use. And then enrage here is a crazy damage leader. It just ups the damage from all your stuff massively, but greatly benefits from having 99 points in it. And also the Demon's Rage Skirun makes it work a lot better because it extends that damage buff. Because the 7 seconds is just not quite enough, I'd say. It feels a little bit short, but having the Demon's Rage Skirun on there makes it go for longer. As long as you're getting hit by things when you have enrage on. So that's everything to say for these 3 skills. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope it's been informative. I'll just let's show a bit of water's protection at the end here. Me attacking and see if we can get this water burst. There we go, that was a little water burst. Using enrage here. If you ever see a knight in PvP do that little lean back and roar in the air, run away. Be very scared, because that's gonna be scary. It's gonna be doing lots of damage. So do that roar, and then if we just watch our armor here, you can see it going up as I get hit by things. It's triggering. You saw it go up in a burst, just as I went to that there. I'll just say one last thing, which I mentioned in the last video too, is that for killing other knights in PvP, using both enrage and spikes together is a very, very good thing to do. Reason being is spikes only really hits melee attackers, so it's only going to hit other knights, and when they're attacking you, they're going to take quite a lot of damage in retaliation. Now stack this with, you put ice needles in, high water percentage, which you can get from Sudden Skirun for Angelic Form, the Lord of Winter one. It's easy for everyone to get, so you can have high water percent with this ice needles. Do loads of retaliation damage. You then put a rage on as well, so it massively increase your damage and get auto crit, and suddenly these knights attacking you are taking loads of damage in retaliation. So that's definitely something to think about. I see loads of knights just butting heads and not killing each other, but if you use these skills well, you're gonna be killing each other. That's basically the way for knights to fight other knights. So that's it from me. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.